Right now, for the middle class of the world, we're in a crash.
It's going to collapse. You should be very worried.
The rich don't work for money. Don't you touch that stuff.
They have money working for them.
Very big difference in mentality here. The game the bankers and the rich play is different than what they teach you in school. All over the world, what does school teach you about money? And the answer is nothing, and that's not a mistake.
You couldn't learn very much here.
We've been here before. Whereas schools don't teach us economic history. So what happens to the average person in a financial crash, they don't know what to do.
And so if someone's listening to us that's stuck in that poor middle class trap and they hear it's their fear that ultimately is keeping them from that, that's a hard thing to hear, Robert. But you're going to give them the information about what they can do if they can get out of that fear.
You don't know if something is an asset or a liability until you can say which way the cash flows. So a house, is it an asset or liability? Well, if it's taking money from your pocket, it's liability. And that's what the game is kind of hardwiring into your head. Humanity is evolving, and you have to ask yourself, what does God want done in the evolution of life? I don't think God wants people to be poor. I think God wants evolution. He wants everybody to enjoy wealth, not just the rich. So most of my thoughts on a daily basis is how can I serve more people, not how much money can I make. The more people I serve, the more effective I become.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
I was super excited to have Robert Kiyosaki back on London Real for the third time. Now, Robert is the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the #1 selling personal finance book of all time. And he was here to talk about his brand new book called Fake. And Robert is talking about fake money, fake teachers, and fake assets. He's also talking about the crash that's up and coming and what's going to happen to all of us if we're not aware of what's going to happen. He went on to talk about how you can avoid paying taxes, the implications of cryptocurrency. This is an episode you don't want to miss. But I was also super honored to participate with Robert in America's first weekly cash flow summit. It's a brand new way of making money. And as a former Wall Street trader, I was super excited to introduce this investment strategy to the public for the very first time. Now, as the host of the event, I'm able to offer you an exclusive space at the summit. But to secure your spot, you must act now. So click on the link below or go to londonreal.tv/cashflow and secure your spot. And I look forward to seeing you at the summit. Now, I give you Robert Kiyosaki. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Robert Kiyosaki, the entrepreneur, educator, and investor, best known as the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the #1 personal finance book of all time. You have become a passionate and outspoken advocate for financial education by challenging the way tens of millions of people around the world think about money. Your new book, Fake, warns of the next financial crisis and what we can do to protect ourselves. Robert, welcome back to London Real.
Well, Brian, I'm honored and I'm really glad I see your office because this is amazing.
You like it here?
I like it. It fits my, it's so eclectic. It's great.
Thank you so much. Last time we spoke, I came out to Arizona.
Right.
We sat down and had an amazing conversation about a lot of different things. And it really blew up. I think over 10 million people ended up watching that, Robert. So there's some vibe. I don't know if it's the two of us or people really getting into your heart and your mind that people really tune into. And it's people of all ages. So I'm super excited, to sit down here with you. Tell me about London. What's your relationship like with this city? Do you like it here? It's not sunny like Arizona. What do you think?
Well, I love London just for the history of it. It's a seafaring nation. And the school I went to was U.S. Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point, New York. And we learned how to sail ships and navigate the seas. So, the sun never sets on the British Empire.
Right.
And so that's my association. Plus, I played rugby. And I remember coming to Twickenham for the Rugby World Cup. I think it was in 27, 8, whatever it was. And it was like, my God, I'm here to play, for rugby, because rugby started here in London, in England.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of fond memories. Not a good memory, but my first wife was English from Surrey. That only lasted 9 months. It wasn't her fault, it was my fault. She should never have married a rugby player. And I came back several times to play rugby here. So it's been, those are my drinking and playing rugby and chasing beautiful women days. And I loved it here. So anyway, that's my association with England.
Yeah, well, welcome back. I mean, you were a merchant marine, spent a lot of time, all around the world doing that. And I guess England really paved the way for a lot of that seafaring tradition and protocols, right?
Correct. They ruled the oceans. There was a British East India Company, one of the most notorious pirate company going.
One of the first limited companies, right?
Correct. And the American flag is a flag of the British East India Company. And most people don't know that. So they said, well, in America, they tell us that Betsy Ross sold the flag. All Betsy Ross did was take the British East India flag. She look it up. And she put stars on it.
Really?
And that was the American flag. So the sun still doesn't set on the English Empire.
I'm going to look that up.
We were called the Great Pirates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really curious about you, Robert, because, when I saw you in Arizona, I saw how you're living out there, Rich Dad headquarters. We spent time with Jim Rickards, and it was just an amazing time. But I noticed that you don't have to travel the world and do all this teaching. You could retire, but you still do. And I'm wondering what pushes you to get out there and make these long trips. I mean, even when I saw you in Arizona, you were just coming back from Japan. You were, struggling with health, but you were showing up and making it happen. Why?
Right. Well, the long answer to a short question is being an entrepreneur. I was in the rock and roll industry. And back in the 80s, I started studying with a man named Dr. R. Buckminster Fuller, best known for the geodesic dome. So in '67, I hitchhiked from New York City to Montreal, Canada, to see Expo '67. And Buckminster Fuller's dome was the U.S. pavilion there. So Expo '67 was the World's Fair on the Future, and Fuller was a futurist. But I didn't meet him there. And then back in 1981, I finally met him in Kirkwood, California, on a seminar called The Future of Business. And so I studied with him 81, 82, and 83. And I was a hardcore make money entrepreneur. And one day Fuller asked me, he says, "What's your life's purpose?" And I said, "Make money." And how did I know that was the wrong answer? And he scolded me, because here I'm in rock and roll, it's sex, drugs, rock and roll. I don't do drugs, but I was trying for the rest. And he goes, "It's a waste of a good mind just to make money." I'm going, "What do you mean?" He says, I thought we were supposed to make money. And he just challenged my paradigm, the way I looked at world and the business. He says, and I cover this in Fake, and the question he asked me, he says, "Why don't you do what God wants you to do?" I went, "What?" He says, "Look, humanity is evolving. And you have to ask yourself, what does God want done? Not what Robert Kiyosaki wanted done. What does God want done?" And he kind of scolded me in front of the whole class. I'm going, I said, "What's wrong with rock and roll?" He goes, "It's about you. It's your passion, but it's not God's purpose." I'm not really religious. I'm not pumping that. So the question, I had to ask myself, what does God want done in the evolution of life? And it came to me, I don't think God wants people to be poor. And today in the world, America especially, is this gap between the rich and everybody else. And I know the game of the rich. My rich dad taught me, you know it because you're the banker. The game the bankers and the rich play is different than what they teach you in school. And that's the story of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. My poor dad, PhD, stands for poor, helpless, and desperate. They don't know anything about money. And they're teaching our kids. And my rich dad was an entrepreneur who never finished school. I grew up in Hawaii. So all of the pieces of the puzzle, when Fuller scolded me back in '83, the pieces of the puzzle and my life started to come together. And I understood what he was saying then. He says, well, maybe we should stop ripping people off. It might be a good thing. And, a question I ask all over the world, what does school teach you about money? And the answer is nothing. And that's not a mistake. That's not an accident. I knew that. Most people know that. But the way to keep the poor and middle class working hard is never teach them what the rich know. So if you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which came out in 1997, it's what the rich teach their kids about money, the poor and middle class do not. And I had already retired. I made enough money at 47, so I didn't have to work again for the rest of my life. And I said, now what do I do with the rest of my life? And so that's when I came out with Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the cash flow game, because poverty hurts. I don't like it. And I don't like that our academic system's so corrupt. We know the banking system's corrupt. We know politics is corrupt, but academics is just as corrupt. So I just said, well, if exactly as Fuller said, what does God want done, not what I want done. Martin Luther King said it another way. King says, I just want to do God's will. So that's what I cover in Faith. What does God want done?
You're giving me weird flashbacks here, Robert, because for 20 years of my life, I was in banking, trying to do what was good for Brian.
Right.
But honestly, the last 8 years has been London Real, and this is definitely what God wants done.
Yeah.
And it's a complete...
Education.
Yeah.
But you'll never get this on CNBC.
Right, because it doesn't play in with the whole structure that you talk about.
Street.
With Wall Street, right. And the fact that it's corrupted our academic institution, that kind of makes you mad, doesn't it? One thing if it's the banking and the politics, but this is where we send our children and we trust them to do the right things for them, and yet they're being not taught something so fundamental. Like you asked your dad when you were a kid, Dad, you asked your teacher, when are you going to teach us about money? And it was just...
Never.
Never.
And they never will. So anyway, so that's why I keep going. That's why I appreciate, your support of my work and time and all this, because somebody, without guys like you, nobody'd hear about me. I was on CNN calling the crash of 2008. I said, Lehman's going down. You can check it out. I said to Wolf Blitzer, Lehman's going down. And he goes, oh! And he got kind of flustered because they're not allowed to say stuff like that.
Right.
And we had Gene Chatsky, who represents Wall Street, the mutual funds and 401k guys. She goes, so they don't want what we know out there. So that's why fake is fake money, fake teachers, fake assets. And the asset part, where that comes from. It's the City of London, Wall Street, the derivatives markets, LTCM, long-term capital management records. And all of us that know are kind of getting out. That's why I love Jim Rickards. I had dinner with him the other night. That's why we're talking. This is what's really going on. But our school system will never tell us that because they're part of the process. Fake money, fake teachers, fake assets. They're all one scenario. And that's what Bucky Fuller's kind of inspired me to do back in '83. He says, you know something. What do you know? Share it. What does God want done? Or as Martin Luther King says, I just want to do God's will. So what drives me on in my health is not the best, but the will, the spirit keeps me on.
And you're still publishing books. You got another one on the way. You're going from here to Poland to Romania to
South Africa to Japan to...
It's a powerful pace. I want to get into what we talk about in Fake.
Yeah, but CNN never invited me back after that either.
And I can imagine, I mean, I was telling you earlier, when I was in banking here in London, Lehman was one of my clients.
Right.
So there were 5 traders over there that I got to know really well over 5 years personally. And to suggest that Lehman would have gone bankrupt even 6 months earlier, it's sacrosanct.
Yeah.
Not to mention from a network that probably gets a lot of advertising dollars from blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And then I watched it happen on a Sunday night. I was telling you, I got a call at home from one of the traders said, "Are you coming into work?" I said, "It's Sunday night." "I'm not." And he said, we're melting down now. We need you in because we have to undo all of our transactions now. And they walked out with cardboard boxes.
Right. And that's because Lehman didn't play ball with them on LTCM, the Russian ruble deal.
Right, and we're going to get into this.
So they banged Lehman because, hey, you broke the boys club code. It's a nasty business.
Yeah, and you talk about that in the fake assets, and I want fake money. I wanted to preface this whole interesting thing by a quote that you've said once, and you said, "The primary difference between a rich person and a poor person is how they manage fear." And when most people hear that, they would probably say, "Well, that's something completely different than money, Robert. That doesn't have anything to do, with money." You have a lot of strong statements where you say things like that. How do people normally react?
Well, when I talk to most people, I said, look, first of all, let's go back to what is financial education? It's not get a job, work hard, save money, and invest in a well-diversified portfolio of stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and ETFs. That's not it. Money is, the financial industry is 2 things, debt and taxes. Debt and taxes. And that's where fake starts. 1971, Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, and the US dollar became debt. And we still tell kids to go to school, get a job, work hard, save money, and get out of debt. Now, who tells them to do that? That's the most ridiculous thing there is.
The book starts and it says, lie number 1, saving money will make you rich.
Yeah, it never will. You know that.
All taught that as kids.
Yeah, because they can print it. Why would you save it and why would you work for it if they can print it faster than you can work for it? And number 2 is they keep dropping the interest rates on it. Japan still has zero interest rate policy. And the Japanese are the biggest savers in the world. And I'm Japanese, I'm 4th generation. They're not too bright.
Right.
Why do you keep saving when they're printing it? When I'm in Japan, that's what I mean by fear. They're so afraid because the Japanese, they're a good culture, but they do as they're told.
Right. It's very conformist.
Very conformist. They're very conformist. So they just do as they're told, and then they just save money, and their government, this guy, Abenomics, is just printing trillions of it and buying ETFs with it, and they don't know what to do.
And they've been doing this for 20 years.
Because they're afraid.
They're afraid, okay.
They're afraid they might make a mistake. They're good little students in school. Go to school, get a job, don't make mistakes.
Right, and that's what school conditions people to do,
Correct.
is to not get mistakes.
Correct.
Get an A on the test, show up and do your homework. But to be a great entrepreneur and investor and a great rich person, you have to engineer mistakes into your life.
Well, I write about it in Fake, the way I learned to be I flew for them, I stopped sailing for Standard Oil of California as a 3rd mate for them. And I went to fly for the US Marine Corps in Vietnam. And the military education is different than academic education. We're taught to make mistakes. So every day I'd fly and we had to kill the engine on our aircraft and crash.
It's called auto rotation. I used to fly R-22s, and it's the scariest thing you've ever done.
But every aircraft we did, I was cross-trained in all the aircraft. We always practice crashing. Because one day, as you know, you will crash.
And you did crash.
And I did crash 3 times. But if I didn't practice that, I'd be dead. So what happens to the average person in a financial crash, they don't know what to do. And right now, as you know, for the middle class of the world, we're in a crash. The purchasing power of the yen, the euro, the rupiah, all going down. And people are working harder and harder and harder. And the central banks of the world are printing more money. Interest rates, Trump just told the Fed, don't you raise those interest rates. Well, that screws all the savers.
Right. And everyone hears the economy's doing great and the stock market's up, but the middle class and the poor are having a harder time.
Correct.
Right.
And that's why I write and I speak.
And so if someone's listening to us that's stuck in that poor middle class trap and they hear it's their fear that ultimately is keeping them from that, that's a hard thing to hear, Robert. But you're going to give them the information about what they can do if they can get out of that fear.
Well, every time I do a lot of speaking to the masses out there, Lehman doesn't invite me in because we're gone, but they go, what, it's so risky. What you're saying is risky. And I said, what I do isn't risky for me, but it's risky for you. And when somebody says, what is risk? You have to look in the mirror. Do you know what I mean? For me to fly in Vietnam, that was high risk. But the higher the risk, the more you have to study. You know that, I know that. So if you're not going to study, you're not going to practice and all that, then you should do what Wall Street tells you to do. Buy, 401ks, mutual funds, ETFs and all that. But that's where they're fake assets, because they only make Wall Street or the City of London rich. Just watch where the cash is flowing. Follow the money.
Yeah.
It's not making the poor middle class rich. All Wall Street in America has done is rip off the pensions, because pensions are the biggest pool of money in America. And states like Kentucky, New Jersey, Illinois, California, Hawaii are going bankrupt because Wall Street went in and just sucked all the cash out of their pensions. So the school teachers like my dad, the firefighters and police officers, they have no retirement now. And so that's why it's fake money, fake teachers, fake assets. They're the same system. And that's what Bucky Fuller encouraged me years and years ago. He says, you better tell the world what you know. And that's what I knew.
Let's talk more about this fake money, because I'd love to go through each one of these pieces and just keep a little bit more of an idea. So Nixon takes us off the gold standard, which basically means now they can print money whenever they want. So what you're saving and hoping that it'll be worth something one day is at the whim of the government to just print more and make it obsolete.
Well,
makes you upset just thinking about it, doesn't it?
Yeah, if you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Rich Dad's lesson number 1, the rich don't work for money. Don't you touch that stuff.
You said when someone gives you a paycheck, something inside of a person just shuts off, right?
Well, it's not even that. They've already sucked the life out of your paycheck.
Right.
You see, in 71, that's where fake starts. My rich dad sent me a letter. I was stationed on an aircraft carrier off Vietnam. And it says, hey, did you know that Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard? And we didn't know. We're not in the banking industry. And he says, watch out, the world's going to change. So by the time I got the letter, it was 72. And then my co-pilot and I said, well, what does gold and gold standard mean? Because we didn't know. Was illegal for Americans to own gold in 72. Imagine that.
Wow.
That's how powerful gold was. And the more I researched it, the more I found out. So my co-pilot and I, where the book starts, fake starts, we fly behind enemy lines to go look for gold, which proves Marines are not that smart.
You were quite a wild one, weren't you, Rob?
Yeah, we went to look for gold, and we're standing in front of this little Vietnamese woman who's the broker for the gold company, and she's selling this little cubes, little nuggets of gold. And then, gold was 35 an ounce. It was now pushing 50 an ounce. So I figured, well, she's behind enemy lines. We're behind enemy lines. I can negotiate a deal. And she's a little tiny woman, little red teeth, because they chew beetle nuts all day long. And I go, I'll give you $40. And she goes, ha, ha, ha. So what's she laughing about? We're behind enemy lines. I got US dollars. She goes, ha, ha, ha. And then I realized she knew more about money than I did. I don't think she went to Harvard. Do you know what I mean? She knew that this was worthless. The gold was worth more than my dollars. And that's where the fake money comes from. And then I got curious.
Okay. So even she knew, with very little education behind enemy lines, that the gold was a real asset.
It's called spot, right?
Right, spot price,
yeah,
as they know.
All over the world, guess what? Same price, right?
Yeah, it's the same price.
Behind enemy lines, same price. And I'm going, So why did they take dollar off the gold standard? And what does this mean? What don't we know? And it followed with my rich dad. The pieces of the puzzle kept falling into place. So what that meant was in 781, they could print as much money as they wanted. So as the economy of the United States worsened, the trade deficit was going up, they could print and print and print and print. So that's why when you read Fake, it says, the people that are being screwed today are the poor and middle class because they work for money. The banker friends, they're not working for money.
They have money working for them.
Yep.
Right.
Very big difference in mentality here. So we have, in America today, we have, even Ray Dalio of Bridgewater, one of the biggest hedge fund guys in America. He's saying this gap between the rich and everybody else is too wide. Well, you could have seen that back in 1972, because the moment you corrupt money, the very thing that everybody works for, saves, counts on, they were screwed anyway. And our school systems, fake money, fake teachers, fake assets, part of that same system. Government, education, Wall Street, or City of London.
And how does the fake teachers coming in from there, they reinforce those same ideas? They teach us to be employees, right? To not make mistakes.
Go to school,
right?
Get a job.
And it's very subtle, right?
Yep.
They don't say, I'm going to train you to be a worker bee the rest of your life, but they educate you in a way where that's what you come out.
Right. And in Paris today, they have the yellow jackets.
Yeah, the protesters.
What's going on in America today are red for ed. All these school teachers are putting on red t-shirts because they know they're being screwed. They're protesting and all this. Their pension plans have been sucked dry by Wall Street. And what do? They put hedge fund managers in to manage the pensions. You got to be kidding me. You put a hedge fund guy in to manage the biggest pot of money called the school teachers, firefighters, and police officers' pensions? They just sucked all the cash out of it. And the teachers are going, what happened to us? But because they don't know anything, it's red for ed. They're out there protesting in mass all over the United States. But you don't hear about it. They talk about the yellow jackets. They don't talk about red for ed. So this whole thing is coming apart right now. And it goes back to the question I have always asked, why doesn't our school teach us about money? Because Wall Street won't let them.
That's simple.
That's simple.
Now, you got a different education about money with your rich dad.
Correct.
And I reread that book when I went out to see you in Arizona. And what really hit me was the hard lessons he made you learn when you went to go work for him. And I don't even know how you kept going back, but because it was weeks and weeks of asking you to do things, I think not paying you,
right.
But he was forcing your brain to be uncomfortable so it could turn it into kind of the entrepreneurial brain, right? What were some of the things he was doing? Because for a young kid, I mean, it must have been flabbergasting, right?
Well, I said, I want you to teach me about money. So I said, why should I teach you? You go to school, my poor dad's not going to teach you. I said, oh, finally he acquiesced. He said, okay. He says, but if I teach you, you work for me for free. And I said, why for free? And my poor dad went nuts. He says, because if I pay you, you think like an employee. Your brain will change. Wow. If you learn never to work for money, you'll be a rich man. So my dad, the poor dad.
And the backstory for people, your dad was the poor dad.
Right.
PhD.
Stanford, Northwestern, University of Chicago, the head of education for the state of Hawaii, candidate for lieutenant governor of Hawaii as a Republican of all things. They know nothing about money. And they teach our kids.
Right.
They're good people. 80% are good people. 20% just are there for the pension and the paycheck. We know that.
And your dad knew that the poor dad was the one to go talk to about business. Like he knew that you should go talk about him about money.
Right. My poor dad said, go talk to your best friend's father, Mike's father. I said, why is that? He says, because Mike's father's an entrepreneur. And I'm 9 years old, so what's an entrepreneur? And he said, well, I'm an employee. They're two different people.
Right.
Mindset-wise.
Right. And this is powerful. Once you give someone a paycheck, their brain turns off.
Correct.
Because
and then the promise of a pension.
Right.
And job security.
which is kind of a paycheck in disguise.
Correct.
After you stop working. Back to that old analogy, give the man a fish, eats for the day, teach him to fish, eats for a
Correct.
lifetime.
Yeah, one is capitalism, one is socialism.
Right.
Today, and I don't know if you've been following it here in the UK, but the Democrats, they've gone hardcore communist. You know, they have Ocasio-Cortez,
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren. You know, Bernie Sanders looks like a conservative. You know, he's as hardcore socialist as they come. And they want to give everybody free education, free medical, you know, free manicures, free pedicures,
Universal basic income.
universal income.
What do you think of all that?
Well, it's wonderful if you know how to pay for it. But they'll do anything to get elected.
Right. Yeah, they have to go extreme right now, otherwise they have no chance.
Right.
And so a couple of the lessons, your rich dad said, I'm not going to give you a paycheck. And yet you still showed up. What was he trying to do those first few months were you working for him? What was he trying to get across to you? Because he taught you the hard way about money.
Well, it came from a lesson before Rich Dad. Well, I was in Sunday school. I flunked out of Sunday school also.
How do you do that?
I never did well in Sunday school.
Okay.
But my Sunday school teacher was a young, pretty woman, you know, and she said, I'm like 9. And she goes, why were the 3 wise men wise? You know, I go, because they were rich. You know, they gave the swaddling Jesus gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So they had to be rich guys, I said.
And they know commodities as well.
Yeah, good idea. And she goes, no, that's not it. I said, well, they had gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Well, that's not it. I said, why were they wise? And I went, I don't know. She says, what made them wise was they always sought the best teacher. And she says, if you're going to be successful in your life, you've got to find the best teachers. And so with that, when my poor dad said, go seek out your rich dad, I was just following her advice. Okay. And today, that's why you and I know Jim Rickards and Nomi Prinz and all these people. They're the guys that actually came from the inside, just like you, from the inside the machine. And they know what's going on. And they tell the world what's going on. So I've had a habit ever since then, or a policy, if I find out there's a great teacher, and a great teacher is somebody who comes from the inside, not the outside. You know, when I was in flight school, I swear to God, my instructors could fly because I flew with them. But in school, you don't know if your instructor is for real or not. That's where the fake teacher comes from. When I was in my MBA program, I was still in the Marine Corps. Came back from the war. I'm in the MBA program, and back then, this is 73 now, and the students were spitting on me, yelling at me at the University of Hawaii, you know.
Wow.
I'm there, I was stupid enough to go in my Marine Corps outfit, my flight suit, and they were yelling at me, baby killer and all this. I'm sitting in this classroom, and my MBA accounting teacher doesn't know accounting, you know. I'm going nuts. I'm not an accountant, but I knew he wasn't an accountant also, so I took him on. I said, are you an accountant? He goes, I have a master's in accountancy. I said, that's not the question. Are you an accountant? I have a master's in accountancy. I said, and I stood up and I said, you know, Marines are not the brightest guys. I said, are you an accountant? Same answer. I said, you're a fake. You don't know what you're talking about. And to this day, when I listen to what people are teaching kids about accountancy, it's bad accountancy.
Right, because it's not practical. It's not real world.
It's confusing.
Right. And
You know, assets put money in your pocket, liabilities take money from your pocket. They count anything of value as an asset. They count your car as an asset, your house as an asset. When it's really taking money from your pocket. Your retirement plan, guess what? It's a liability. It's taking money from your pocket every month. And whose pocket does it go to? Wall Street or City of London. And that's why, as you and I know, these funds, you know, they sit there, they go, assets under management. That's what they're paid on. You're not making any money, but they're making fortunes on the fees and assets under management. And most of these hedge fund guys and all that, you're not making any money, but they're sucking the fees out every day.
Right. And most poor people confuse assets for liabilities. They think their home is an asset. It's actually a liability.
Right. And again, that's why I was yelling at the accounting teacher. I said, An asset is a noun, like a house. Cash flow is a verb. So to understand if it's an asset or liability, it takes a noun plus verb. So if the cash is flowing out of your pocket, it's a liability. If the cash is flowing into your pocket, asset, verb, it's an asset. So I own 7,000 rental properties. Those are assets. Every month, the cash flows in. Whereas many people have the big house on the hill and the cash is flowing out.
Right.
And they're going broke.
Right. It's like a frame of mind. The other thing the poor don't understand is the number one expense for most people is taxes. And yet we don't even see it. Isn't that weird? You walk around and you look at the paycheck and say, that doesn't seem right. And you don't realize that the government's got a huge hand in your pocket and you are doing nothing to minimize that. Again,
Correct.
This is what's very different about the rich and the poor.
Well, the reason the rich don't work for money is number one expense is tax. See, there's three kinds of income: earned, portfolio, passive. So earned income is if I get a job, that's earned income. If I'm a doctor or a programmer, that's earned income because I'm working for it. If I buy, let's say, Apple for $10 and I sell it for $20, that's portfolio income, capital gains.
Yeah.
But passive income, which is cash flow, is never taxed. So it's not, and so these guys are screaming right now in America, tax the rich. I said, good luck. Because most of the guys complaining, they don't know there's three kinds of income. And the rich don't have jobs anyway. They have assets. And so the average schmo out there, poor guy, sent the kid to school. They don't learn this. So that's why in Fake, as you were talking about it, there's a newspaper article about Jared Kushner.
Yeah.
And he explains how the Trumps and the Kushners don't pay taxes and make millions of dollars. And the reporter couldn't understand him because our schools will never teach you that three types of income.
And they judged him and say they're wrong and it's cheating. And we see that over and over again. Amazon not paying taxes. What do you say to people when they come up to you and say, Robert, it's not fair. It's not fair they're not paying taxes.
Well, there's always three sides to a coin, heads, tails, and the edge. So which side of the coin are you on? From my side, it's fair. But this is the difference. Everybody can do the same thing I do because the tax laws are for everybody. We don't say, well, the tax laws are only for the rich. No, the tax laws are for everybody to use if you have the right financial education. And the reason I'm an advocate of financial education, without that education, you have to pay taxes. You see, very few people will buy what I do, make $1 million and pay zero tax. That takes, and my rich dad taught me that playing Monopoly. That's how it started, 4 greenhouses, 1 red hotel. Or the McDonald's formula. I write about it here. McDonald's, Ray Kroc.
Yeah.
McDonald's is in the real estate business. So they sell hamburgers, but they buy real estate, so they pay no taxes. This guy Bezos, he's $16 billion. How much tax did they pay on that $16 billion? Zero.
And that's all legal. Anyone can do it.
Everybody can do it.
Most people lack the education.
Correct.
So Jared learned about money when he was a kid by watching his father, by watching these people invest in real estate, and said, wow, not only do you get to make the money, you get to keep the money. That's a big problem a lot of people don't understand. Look how much money I made, but how much did you keep? Because that could be half.
How much tax did you pay?
Right, what tax did you pay? And so you always say, this is the law. The law is true for every citizen. You can do it, but most people just don't do it. Sometimes, like you said, they don't have the education, because you need to have a plan if you're going to go do risky things.
Well, it's not risky. I mean, to me, what's risky is having a job and paying taxes.
Yeah.
And saving money because they're printing it. That's the worst thing of all. And that's why there's fake money, fake teachers, because the teachers they don't know it.
Right.
And fake assets, because Wall Street or the City of London or Lehman Brothers or Goldman and all, they're not going to tell you this.
Yeah.
How are there billionaire bankers today? Aren't they supposed to be watching your money,
Yeah, I want to talk about that. You said in here also, the greatest asset you have is your mind. What does that mean?
Well, because money doesn't exist anymore. Inside Fake, I cover the infinite return. When I came back from Vietnam in '73, January of '73, My poor dad said, "Get your MBA." And my rich dad laughed. And so I asked him,
Why did he laugh?
I do?"
Why did your rich dad laugh?
He says, "Because you're going to turn out to be an employee. Who else hires guys with MBAs?" You know what I mean? He was just pragmatic about it. He says, "If you really want to be rich, take a class on real estate." And I said, "Why is that?" He says, "I didn't know at the time, but once you understand real estate is based on debt." And he says, "You will learn how to use debt as money," because that's what happened in 71. The US dollar became debt.
Right.
So once you learn how to use debt as money, you can never say, "I can't afford it." You see, because the banks will give you, so the banks, after the crash of 2008, the banks gave me $300 million tax-free to buy real estate that the idiots had lost. I hate this, and they were idiots because the prices were so high. Why would you buy it at the top of a market? Don't you know that's going to crash? Oh, no. This is, that was the subprime, was the derivatives market, the MBSs and all that stuff, had driven the price of real estate so high, and the rest of us were just waiting. And then when the whole thing came crashing down, all this real estate was now available, and they needed, the Fed and those guys in the Treasury needed guys like us to go in there. So Wall Street gave us hundreds of millions of dollars to mop up all that real estate these guys had lost. Now, it's fair because everybody could do it.
Right.
So, when I asked the average guy, I said, why don't you use debt? They can't even get a loan because their scores, their FICO scores, I don't even have them here, are so bad.
Right.
So that's what's going on in the world today. It's fake money, fake teachers, fake assets. The school teachers will never tell you that because they don't know it. My poor dad never knew that. And they think the rich are crooks. The rich just play by different laws. The rules are the same, but you have to do what the government wants you to do.
Talk to me about these fake assets and what do people have to know about them? We were talking about my history in the crisis. I remember in '98 when the Russian ruble crashed.
Yeah.
Jim Rickards, our friend, was at Long-Term Capital Management. Yeah. I was trading derivatives at Bankers Trust and the First National Bank of Chicago. Yeah. And I saw them out there, and everybody wanted to do business with Long-Term Capital. It was a big hedge fund, and it nearly went bankrupt. But
LTCM nearly took down the world economy.
Yeah.
One hedge fund with these quote-unquote
fake assets.
Well, because nobody took in the counterparty risk to it.
Right, and they were highly levered because they were these rocket scientists, right?
They were Nobel Prize winners.
Yeah, Nobel Prize winners, Myron Scholes, and then one of the big guys from Salomon Brothers.
John Merriweather.
Yeah, Merriweather, who was in that book, Liar's Poker.
Yeah.
They went out there, and on their reputation alone, they didn't have the balance sheet to back it up. They got 20x leverage, 30x, 40x, 50x leverage, and they had massive positions. And when the ruble moved and markets moved, not only were they about to go bankrupt, but all the institutions that had lended money to them were about to go bankrupt.
The counterparty.
Yeah, the counterparty. And I saw this happening, and it was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But how can you explain that to people, and then what do they need to know about fake assets to protect themselves, especially from this upcoming crash or crisis that's going to happen?
Can I give you a very simple...
Please.
Okay, I think I got it. This is, because I like to, Rich Dad is important because I keep it simple. Okay, this here is a balloon. So in 1971, Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. So what did that mean? That meant the U.S. government, the U.S. Treasury, could now print money. So the U.S. Treasury would sell a bond to the Fed. Over here would be the Bank of England, Bank of Japan, ECB, and all this. So in 71, it was the U.S., not anybody else, basically screwed the world economy. So rather than fix the economy, they just did this. So things were fine. They fixed the economy. Inflation went through the roof. There's a dollar sign on it. And like this.
They're pumping money into the system.
So 87, there was, the real estate, everything's getting expensive. Inflation's going crazy in the 80s.
Right.
87 crash, big crash. Did anything happen? No, nothing happened. They just... So 87, it went like this, and then there was the LTCM plus the Southeast Asian crash, the Rupiah crash and all this.
Yeah, in the end of the 90s.
So what did Greenspan do? It was the Greenspan put, right? He says, oh, don't worry. We'll give the banks all the money they want so you won't crash. So the banks and Treasury and the central bank, the Fed and Bank of England, they're like keeping this thing out. So everything's inflated now.
They're pushing money into the system to prop it up every time.
Fake money.
Fake money.
This is fake money
Right.
going in. So then in 2000, the dot-com crash hits, goes. So Greenspan kind of panics and he says, oh my God, we better keep this thing going, because that was a pretty big pop, you know?
Yeah, I was there.
So 2008, that's when everybody was into derivatives and, you know, pumping this baby up. And it did nearly come down. We had some Lehman came down and Bear Stearns was wiped out. And it was like this. So what did Bernanke and those guys do? More. So after 2008, they just kept pumping it, and it's getting worse. So now we have the stock market, this one area of the economy, all-time highs, floating on fake money. Real estate, I mean, I don't know how people can afford to live. You know, in New York, I was looking at a condo for $55 million. You know, real estate in Silicon Valley, you can't afford to live there. And then all these companies started borrowing money, so the economy's good, and you know, unemployment's low and all this. They say there's no inflation, but have you seen the price of food, real estate, and student loans and medical? It's a bubble, you know? So now what's going to happen is the baby boomers, my generation, are going to start to retire. There's no money there. Social Security is broke, pensions are broke, the students are broke. You know, they're screwing everybody with debt. So let me ask you a question. This is called...
This is making me nervous.
I know. This is called, not economics, this is called Bubblenomics. But they'll never teach you this in school.
And why do they keep printing money? Because they want to save something.
Because it's an addiction. You know, this is like heroin. The moment you take that one hit, they say, okay, I'll quit next week. And the economy gets worse, so they go, Trump gave us a tax cut in America. This thing gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So what happened in 2008, they stopped it by printing money. So they call it the Great Recession. But they didn't really fix anything.
Right.
You know, derivatives went from 700 trillion to 1.2 trillion today. Twice as much. And that is net. You know, doesn't tell the whole story. So when the recession hit, the PhD standard came in. That was Bernanke, you know, and then Yellen. The PhD said, they have PhDs. Well, it's no different than long-term capital, LTCM. They had Nobel Prize winners, people like my poor dad, academics, you know. So anyway, this is what's going on in the world economy today. So the baby boomers are going to retire now. Student loans are bust. So do you have to be an economist to say what's going to happen? Because we're fighting a 12-year war now. Entitlements are going through the roof. National debt to GDP is 109 in America, 109%. 90% is too late. We have to keep printing now. So this is called Bubblenomics, and this is what's going to happen. Got it?
I got it.
Is that economics 101?
Scary stuff.
It's happened throughout history. And that's what I would teach.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.